But one of the things I've learned and I kept with me having that experience a year and 4 months into the industry was that people, like, were trying to find me to go, "Hey, Jen, I've heard of this job. Call them." And I was like, "Wait, I'm meant to be doing this. People are finding me to invite me to go interview for other jobs. I'm gonna tell you everything I can, and if you burn me and you make something out of what I've told you, it will stop. But until as long as it is safe for me to tell you stuff, I will tell you as much as I possibly can so you understand why decisions are being made, what's happening around you." When you get that senior, being able to have those really honest conversations with the management group and your boss is incredibly important.
And we're recording. Jennifer Lewis, thank you so much for stopping by today. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to talk about it to you today.
Oh, and we've got a lot of stuff to chat about, but as always, start at the beginning. You are the founder and leadership coach at Create with Jennifergel. So tell us what Create with Jennifergel is and what your role there as founder is.
So, Create with Jennifergel is coaching practice. I named it. I feel like I was to get this out of the way to start with is the Jennifer Gel part because that is my first name plus my initials that I have. I have two middle initials. So it's really about this idea of co-creating with me as your partner, with me as a coach. And what I do is really work with leaders and teams to identify moments of friction and just let's address the friction before it gets into a really big tear or something that's irreparable. So that's really the work I'm doing as a coach these days.
Okay, so as always, we're going to go back to the beginning. I got to say, I'm really excited to talk to you about everything in general, but a couple of points, especially the fact that you worked at the media company, or was it retail media? It was under the Group M
Right.
banner back in the day when like it was MBS, retail media, and the media company. It took me
Yep.
back to my broadcast days, but let us go back to the beginning. You're from Alberta, but you were born and raised in Woodstock, Ontario.
So I was born in Alberta, moved to Woodstock when I was 5.
Got that
Uh,
completely backwards. Yeah,
no,
see,
it was close, it was
I
close.
was
I was born
close.
in Alberta. My parents actually met in Winnipeg and then moved to Alberta. My father
Oh,
was in
okay.
the military, so the government moved him around a little bit. Both my parents were born in Ontario, and in the '70s, the economy in Alberta wasn't great, so my parents moved back to Ontario when I was 5 years old. I think I probably just gave my age away, and that's okay. So I grew up in Woodstock. Yeah, small little town. Everybody drives by it on the 401 or the 403. But I always say it's a great place to grow up and it's a great place probably to retire. But for me, I just had to get out of Woodstock.
So wait a minute, your dad was in the military. Is it safe to say you were what the Americans would call an army brat?
No, because he left when I was really young. So I grew up with
Mm,
like the stories of the military. My older brother, he got to do the tours and all of that. But no, my dad left the army after he married my mom. They were only married for about 3 years when he retired from the military.
gotcha. So those first 5 years in Alberta weren't spent living on an army base then.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Okay, and so going to Woodstock, you know you're the second person I've had on the podcast from Woodstock?
That's amazing.
It is. No, no, shout out to Jeff Atkinson who was on in like I think he was episode 18 or not, probably even earlier than that, Jeff Atkinson
Okay.
from Green Sabri Racing. So, okay, so you already said this about Woodstock that you say, great place to grow. What was you said? Great place to grow up and great place to retire, but probably not the place that you wanted to start a career. So let's jump into what life was like growing up in Woodstock.
Yeah, so Woodstock was great. It's a small town. When I was there, it was half the size it is today. It's a booming town right now, which good for them for their growth. It was a small town. My father actually owned one of the cab companies, so I never actually had any freedom growing up. My father knew everything I did because there was always one of his drivers who saw me doing something, and my dad would be like, "Hey, how was this last night?" I just remember one time I made a left-hand turn without signaling, and I got pulled over by the cops in Woodstock, and in the morning, my dad's like, "Hey, what'd you get pulled over for?" And I was like, "Dad, like, how do you even know that?" I didn't get a ticket, didn't have anything. I had no need to tell my father this happened, but he had already known about it. So, that was growing up in Woodstock.
That's crazy. It's like this sort of like micro surveillance state. Like he had everyone
Mhm.
looking out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. But I remember also it did help them change one of their policies because 'cause I'd have the drivers drop me off, and a couple times they'd just leave before I was in the house, and I was like, "Dad, what are they doing? They
Oh,
should make sure they know people get in the house before they drive off." So now it is a thing that they generally stop and make sure people get in the house before they drive off.
okay. So that's incredible. But some other things about your life in Woodstock. You were an artist. So what got you into sort of the creative arts?
I always just wanted to play with color. Like, I'm not very coordinated. Like, I'm the person who has random bruises from walking into corners and stuff. Um, so I was always doing something creative, making something. One of my uncles was a photographer, so I had a camera in my hand when I was probably 12 years old. We always had art supplies around. I had a really encouraging art teacher through high school, so just got to play a lot and just explore. It was something my parents were really supportive of. It's just that idea of exploring and trying new things. And even so much in like outside of the arts, but even in like technology, we were one of the first families that had a computer and father was a cab driver. We were not well off, but it was something my parents really wanted us to have was this computer to play with. So I remember like in grade, like early high school, people going, "Why are you like submitting typed up essays?" And I was like, "Well, because I printed at home." But at the time, it was like this weird bias that Jen thought she was so fancy because she got to type it on her computer. But it
No,
was
I
one of those ones like you can't break it, so you might as well play with it.
remember that too. Because when I got my computer, my first computer in elementary school, it was like you're at this sort of crossroads where it's like, do you submit your work wherever this way where there's a handful of you doing it and other people are just writing it up? And you're right, there was a sort of divide where people were like, "Why are you printing it out?" And you almost felt a little self-conscious about that
Yep.
because your
Yeah.
stuff was a little too prim and proper for it. And
Yeah.
then eventually they
Absolutely.
were like, "Yeah, everyone has to submit a printed essay."
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you credit Barbara Walters as being your biggest inspiration? And I asked this question to everyone, and I gotta tell you, when we were doing our pre-production work, this one really hit me. I was just like, nobody has ever said Barbara Walters or anyone within the lexicon of, what Barbara Walters does. I think she's probably the first journalist that anyone's ever referenced.
Yeah. I think at the time it was the I think there was a couple things. It's a sense of like traveling to interview people. I love to travel and just understand people's stories and get curious about people. There was this sense of understanding what was happening in the world. There was this element in journalism about having to know the history of things to understand what's happening today. And I think that was something that was really important to me is just this understanding and also recognizing Woodstock was a small town. So how do I learn more about the world coming from a place like Woodstock? So I think that's where someone like Barbara Walters, who was at the time, top of her game, the most well-known interviewer around. So I think it was just that idea of getting to know more and being curious. I'm always just really curious about what's going on.
Do you have a particular interview that, you were fond of? I know I do, but I wanna hear from you first on that.
Gosh, I don't off the top of my head now.
See, for me, it's her Fidel Castro interview. 'Cause
Okay.
this was I can't remember if it was late '80s, early '90s, but anyways, still the Cold War or pretty damn close to it, and she went down to Cuba to interview him. She was allowed to because journalists were allowed to circumvent the embargo about it,
Mhm.
and I remember she was very matter of fact about and very complimentary to the way he treated her, and it seemed to be at a time when it's like you said, people were curious, and they said, "Oh, we didn't know that," whereas if someone were to be very complimentary of a dictator today, they just kinda jumped down their throat. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying dictators are good or bad or whatever, but it seemed to be at a time when it was, like you said, people would hit the pause button and they were willing to listen to other people.
Mhm.
Whereas now we've passed judgment well in advance of that. But no, if you haven't checked out that interview, I'm sure it's on YouTube 100,000 times over. It's been
Oh,
uploaded.
yeah, I've probably seen it. I wanna go back and refresh myself on that one for sure.
I ask everyone what their very first part-time job ever was, and we've got a couple of them here. So the first one, I guess you could kinda call this we kinda have jokingly say this is someone's first job in media, but you had a paper route.
I did have a paper route when we were kids. Yeah, my brother and I shared the paper route. It was around the neighborhood, and it was at a time when you still had to go door to door, knock on the doors to collect the money, and they
Mm.
had a punch card you have to punch. I would say the best part of it was in Halloween, we always got better treats from our customers than we did the rest of the neighborhood. It
Nice.
was always just like this. Oh, I know you. Here's a full size candy bar.
And going around to collect, because like you said, it wasn't a free paper. Was that tough? Was that a real sort of life experience for you?
uh, it's interesting. I don't think of it that way, but I do think there was a level of responsibility to that because there was a certain amount of it we had to pay to the paper, and part of it we got to keep. And I say we because I did it with my brother. I think though one of the things, and again, I keep referencing my father, but like this willingness to talk to everyone as a cab driver, he was one of those old school cab drivers, talked to everyone, had long conversations. So I also think there's some of that, like, hey, let's just have a conversation when I'm standing here. And I think also it was a really small town at the time, so it felt safer to just be knocking on your neighbors' doors.
When you think about it, you're technically not just a delivery person, but you're also accounts receivable on behalf of the
You are,
company.
yeah.
I know, and I've had other guests on who have said that they learned a lot from that experience, but they said people would take advantage of the fact that it was a kid coming around to collect.
Mm,
So it's good that
yeah.
you didn't have that. Do
No,
you
I
think it was because your dad ran the cab company and people were like, "We're not gonna get anywhere if we don't pay her?"
No, I think it was partly just the small town. I think there were probably times when my parents did go around and do the deliveries, that
Mm.
kind of thing, so it wasn't just like kids. Um, no, I just never felt that way.
And
One of
you
the
were all
advantages of, innocence time in Woodstock. Hasn't always been that way, but it was then, I think.
and what about working mini golf?
Mm, yeah. So there was this miniature golf course in Woodstock that had sort of been let go of and nobody was really running it. And my mom called the city hall to find out who owned it because we were like, hey, mom, I want to run this miniature golf course. So my mom called city hall, ended up getting the name of the person. I'm pretty sure in city hall is not supposed to give out this information, but my mom knew the person she was talking to. Again, small town benefits. We called the owners, and the owners had said they were about to put it in the newspaper and put it up for sale, but they were so excited they had these kids who we were teenagers, not kids, who wanted to run it. They let it here's the keys to the gate and to there was a little small shed that was our office space basically. They gave us the keys and said, "Hey, have at it." And they didn't charge us rent, but we did have to go and figure out things like a business license, figure out insurance for something like that, how to turn the power on because the power hadn't been turned on in years. We learned how to pull up the carpet and use carpet glue and re-green everything and paint everything and set our prices and file taxes and all that. So again, my brother and I did that together. But we did
So
it
what
for in high school, we did it through to probably my first or second summer in college, we did that, and then we just decided we couldn't do it, and now it's big tree lot again right now. It's kinda sad.
if it was Toronto, it'd be a condo by now.
It's true, it
It
would
is
be,
what it
yeah.
would be. Okay, so hold on. This is interesting because I thought it was just a part-time job, but it sounds like you and your brother were managing a P&L as well.
Yeah, we ran a business, we had to go and do the shopping because we also sold pop and chips there and some snacks. We had to go shopping and buy all the miniature golf, clubs, the golf balls, all of that stuff. Yeah, we ran it was a full-on business.
Was that always the idea? Like, did you go there thinking, "Hey, you know what? Maybe they'll open it up and I'll get a part-time job?" Or did you go in there knowing that maybe you need to present some sort of business plan and take some sort of ownership and responsibility if you wanted this to move forward?
I think we went into it with just this, like, random idea that, "Hey, there's a miniature golf course, nobody's running it, can we run it?" And then when we found out the owners wanted nothing to do with it, we very quickly had to pivot. It's like, "Oh, do we wanna take this on?" And my parents were super supportive because obviously we needed their help to figure out how to do all of these things and figure out where to go for suppliers and stuff. So my parents were super supportive. Um, was never the plan, but it was a really great experience. It was some of my first advertising because we were writing letters to the schools offering end of season because the high school got out earlier than the grade schools. So
Mm.
we'd send letters or drop off letters at the grade schools and say, "Hey, bring the class here. We'll do it at a discounted rate." We put ads in the local newspaper where I had done internship in high school. So, yeah, we did all of that stuff.
Look at that. Advertising sounds like your first dollar volume discount deal letter that you've
Yep,
put together
absolutely.
there.
Yep.
And you were delivering paper. So you were working in media.
Yeah. Yep. All comes together.
It all does come together. And you moved your interest in advertising, the creative arts even more forward by going to St. Clair College. Why did you go there and why did you study advertising?
So, I studied advertising. I don't know if they still do this in high school, but in grade 8, we did aptitude tests, and mine said I should be a copywriter. And I was like, "Oh, what is that?" And I realized copywriting is really about being creative on demand. And I consider myself a very creative person, but like to do it on my own time, get my own inspiration, find my own pace. Copywriting and the people who are doing the creative side, I feel like so often they have these really tight deadlines. They have to be creative and just show up and go, here's a brilliant headline. Um, so that was where the curiosity for advertising came up. And my high school did one of those open houses where where all the colleges in Ontario got to come in, do presentations in the classrooms. I had gone to one for Fan Shocks. It was in London, really close. And then I did another one. I can't even tell you what the second one was. But leaving the school, I picked up the St. Clair College brochure walking out of my high school that night. And the first program in there was the advertising business program. I was like, wait, this is what I want to do. And then I applied there. And I don't actually think I applied anywhere else. And I know the guidance counselor at the high school is like, hey, don't you think you should apply somewhere else? I was like, no, this is what I want to do. And I went to St. Clair College in Windsor.
When you say it was the first thing you saw in the brochure, was it just alphabetized? Because that's
It
what
was
I'm imagining.
alphabetized. Yeah.
And that's it. And there it
That
was.
was the first one. Yeah.
That is the universe speaking to you.
That is
That is definitely the
100% the
universe
universe.
speaking to
Yeah.
you. Okay, so you went through the program, you graduated. You were still working at the golf course after graduation. Was that the first summer where you and your brother were winding it down, I guess?
I think we'd started to wind it down before that. I can't actually recall the dates. But yeah, that first summer I came back from college, though, is when I got the job of Bolorama, leveraging those miniature golf skills.
Nice.
I did 6 months with Bolorama, and then got an interview in Toronto. I'd been reached out by someone who was a prior grad of St. Clair College. It's a school that has a really good network of people who bring other people into the city. So I was still living in Woodstock, interviewed in Toronto on one of the snowiest days possible. I actually pulled off the road at one point, called my mom, and was like, I don't think I should be driving to Toronto in this weather. But she told me to go, and I did, and I got that job.
That 6 months that you were at the Bolorama, were you trying to stay within, I guess you could sort of say Southwestern Ontario at that point, or was, like, the goal always to be like, "I gotta get to Toronto"?
I think I was just sort of enjoying my time for a hot minute there, if I'm honest. There was a goal to work in advertising. Like at one point while I was at Bolorama, I got a job at the Shopping News, which was like a local paper. It doesn't exist anymore. And they it was like trying to create a book of business outside of Woodstock of non-advertising clients. So basically it was going door to door to businesses outside of Woodstock. And I did it for 2 days and quit because I was like, I can't do this.
So that was a
So
sales job you were doing.
yeah.
What was it about sales that turned you off?
Well, in that particular case, there was no established relationships at all. And it was outside of Woodstock. It was a Woodstock paper. It it wasn't something I was really comfortable with going like, hey, you've never advertised before, but you should come advertise. I think now it would be different, but at the time I was like, no, I'm not this person. And my mentor was somebody who'd been doing it forever, and you could tell he had no interest in really working with somebody who was straight out of college, teaching them how to do this well.
Mm. Okay, so did you know what, coming from someone that's been working in sales his entire professional career, yeah, team plays a big role in that. If your team doesn't seem motivated in your success or there's no incentive for them to be invested in your success, kills it immediately. I can completely relate to what you're saying. But good thing you kept driving to Toronto in that snowstorm
Hmm.
because this was your first role. I guess you could sort of say your first role in the big Toronto media market. You were a media
Yeah.
assistant at BCP.
Yeah. A BCP is or was, I don't even know if they still have a division, part of Publicis Group.
Okay.
It was a small agency. It was a full service agency. They had an office in Toronto and Montreal. Montreal office was way bigger. And I got to work on Club Med and Calvin Klein jeans and eyewear. And I also got to work on Altamira Mutual Funds. So I got to know some newspaper reps really well at that point because we were calling them saying, I got to change the return rate on this mutual fund,
Mm.
faxing ads and then couriering over the ads. It was a different time, that's for sure.
Seeing as this wasn't a was this really a creative role or was this more of a media role at
It
that
was a
point?
media role.
It was
I
a
was the
media role.
person booking all the ads and sending out insertion orders, still printing insertion orders and signing them and faxing them and mailing them. Yeah,
Getting
it was a
given that
media
y
job.
given that you were a creative person, was this just a holdover job until you could find something in creative? Or when you got your feet wet in this role, did you say to yourself, "Okay, media is probably where I'm gonna stay"?
Yeah, I think I always kind of knew the media side was there because I liked the math of it. The math made sense to me. Um, yeah, at no point did I ever think about trying to change sides, actually. At one point in my career, I thought about going on the account side, but I didn't like being told no that much. Whereas on media, I got to keep my opinion. Whereas I think on the account side, sometimes you have to defer to clients a little bit more.
This is why you wanna steer clear of sales. If you do not like the word no, don't go into sales because your self-esteem will be beaten into the ground. You become numb to the word, I can tell you that. Let's talk about your move to Toronto from Woodstock. You had mentioned that, growing up, you kind of had an eye on moving to this, like into, like, the glitzy big city.
Mhm.
Was it everything you thought it would be when you moved to Toronto?
The first 6 months I was in Toronto, so BCP was at University and Bloor Street.
Mm,
University?
okay.
Yeah. Or Bay and
Right
Bloor.
right where it turns to Avenue, basically right near the ROM?
Yeah.
Yep,
Um, and I lived with my uncle for 6 months at Jane and Eglinton. So it was a very long commute because there was, like, a bus to the subway, to the
yep.
subway. It was awful. Um, but because it was media back in the '90s, there was a lot more stuff to do. I got invited to go do things. I got tickets to go do things, and I'll be honest, quite a few times I took my uncle because I didn't really know a lot of people in the city. So it was a great way to understand the city and to sort of see the city as this version of being spoiled when you can't really afford to do a lot of these things. So I did kind of love it.
What brought you to Bates Media?
Oh, I got fired from BCP on
Really?
April 1st.
Did you
Uh,
think it was a joke when they were doing it?
no, I did not think it was a joke. Um, it was a little traumatic though, to get
I can
fired on,
imagine.
April Fool's Day. But one of the things I've learned and I kept with me having that experience a year and 4 months into the industry was that people, like, were trying to find me to go, "Hey, Jen, I've heard of this job. Call them." And I was like, "Wait, I'm meant to be doing this. People are finding me to invite me to go interview for other jobs." So there was something almost reassuring about that, and at the time, it's not like we all had cell phones and we had this email that everybody could get a hold of us, like, people were putting some effort into finding me at my parents' house, and so for me, that was reassuring, and then the person who'd been my boss at BCP, her brother got me the interview at Bates. So it's connections have got me where I need to be.
Did you have to take some personal time for yourself just to kinda regroup after being fired from BCP?
I went home to my parents for a few weeks, but I got those calls so quickly, I had to go back to Toronto to do these interviews. Yeah, like, the gap isn't actually I don't think you can actually find the gap on my resume because it was so fast.
Did that did that, uh did that help with your confidence? Because that could, like you said, like,
Yeah.
that can be pretty traumatic, like you said, like getting fired, especially on April 1st. And to be
Yeah.
honest with you, I probably would have said, "Is this a joke?" And we know in the advertising industry, it's a little bit more sensitive now than it was years ago, but there were probably times when people did that as April Fool's jokes. HR thought it was
Mm.
funny and they got away with it. So that had to have lifted your spirits a little bit.
Yeah, and the one thing is context. My boss and I there was only 2 people doing media at BCP at the time. Both of us got let go at the same time.
Mm.
Like, they cleared us out as a department to bring in people from Montreal. And But yeah, having people seek me out, being so junior in the industry and having so few contacts, I'd only worked on a few accounts. I'd only been in the industry for just over a year. It was always really helpful to me, and it's been really good context as if you're meant to be here, people are going to support you. And it's the advice I always give people, and they're like, "Jen, what's the best advice you've given the industry?" Is if people are offering you something, say yes because 'cause they're seeing something in you, whether you
Mhm.
see it or not. So for me, that was something I learned so early on, which was really important, and I think it's been a powerful thing that's stayed with me.
So you're out of work for a couple of weeks. You started Bates. How is your new role different from your previous one?
Well, Bates was huge. Like, it was a really big agency at the time versus, like, this really small agency. There was only 2 people at BCP in media, so at Bates, there was a lot of us. In media, I got to work on Wendy's, which is a really big integrated account. I worked on Trojan condoms, which was a fun account to work on. So it was just a change in the pace, the type of accounts we got to work on, and that's where I worked on my second campaign that had to get pulled down. I didn't say this at BCP. I worked on a Calvin Klein jeans campaign that had to get pulled because it was deemed offensive.
Wait,
I
was
was
it
work.
offensive or was it just, like, racy? Because sometimes, especially if it's an underwear ad,
Mm,
it's or even a perfume ad.
if you look up Calvin Klein, there was this feels terrible right now, but it was a bit had a vibe to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was the one where the models looked very young in a wood paneled basement.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
it got pulled. So when I was on Wendy's, though, unfortunately, is when Princess Diana died, and we had
mm.
a campaign that was running that had a version of the Queen waving. We're like, we can't run that right now. That would be bad. So yeah, so it was my second campaign that had to get pulled in my career,
Okay, so
working at Wendy's.
the Wendy's campaign's obvious, though. That's just kind of like, that's a campaign that no one would have blinked at had Princess Diana not passed away. But when you're working on the Calvin Klein campaign, are you sitting in the room going, like, holding your breath a little bit and go, "This might not pan out"?
We knew it was risky. In fact, the only broadcaster that approved it was Much Music because it couldn't get CRTC clearance to run. But
Really?
Much Music at the time said, "Sure, we'll run it." They ran it, like, in the evenings for TV, and then the out of home there wasn't really a clearance thing for out of home, so they took it, but we had to pull it all.
Did it
But
get
they got
pulled
the
in?
publicity out of it, so it's fine.
That's kind of the funny thing about these
Mm.
campaigns is that they're short-lived, but there's just so much publicity around it that it outdoes any media spend they would run. They get way more value out of it. Was this a global campaign or more North American campaign, or was it just really localized to Canada and it got pulled here?
I think it was a North American campaign, and I don't honestly remember what happened in the US with the Calvin Klein one, yeah.
That's crazy because we're talking about a time when there's no social media, and we know if social media doesn't like something, it's people are very quick to amplify their grievances. But in order for this campaign to be taken down, there had to have been efforts. Like people were phoning Calvin Klein or the agency or writing letters and so forth.
Yeah, there was definitely some pressure to get it down for sure, yeah.
Was there a particular category you enjoyed working on between your first two roles?
Um, I don't and I think that curiosity part of me just likes learning all the different categories, like, Wendy's was just an interesting challenge because we were doing store openings, we were doing local out of home, we were trying to
Mm,
do making sure we were covering all of Canada, and, then I worked on Trojan condoms, which was fun because I got to learn about whole different things and how we even talk about that. It was my first entry into doing some, like, resto bar advertising
gotcha.
and putting ads and stuff there.
Working on a condom company, were there certain restrictions attached to that as well? Or even if they weren't formalized restrictions, maybe guidelines from the brand or the advertiser just because they didn't want to get themselves in trouble?
Not from the brand. I think there was a lot of, like, publications that didn't necessarily wanna take the ads at the time, and I think at the time they were trying to be a little bit spicier, which is where we got into things like doing resto bar advertising because it was a little bit freer and made sense
Mm.
in that environment.
There's a great ad that's recycled every Father's Day, and it's an out of home ad, and I see it on the subway every May, June. I don't know if it's Trojan or one of the other brands, but basically they say, to everyone who doesn't use our product, "Happy Father's Day."
Nice.
Very
Yeah,
simple and to the point.
love
Okay, so
that.
I know it's a great one. So your next jump, you moved to WPP, specifically the media company. So what brought you there? And at this point, you're senior media executives. What does that role entail?
Yeah. At the time, we weren't calling it WPP though.
Oh, it
So
wasn't
that's
WPP
always
or
like
Group
weird for
M.
me when it was just no, it
Yeah,
wasn't
it
any of
was
that. I don't,
just the media company. Was this at
yeah.
Young and Dundas?
No, I worked there when it was at on Bloor and Bay.
So they're Blue and Bay. Okay.
Yeah. And that like building that goes around the church, if people are in Toronto, they know that building.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking
Uh,
about. Northeast corner.
yeah.
Yep.
So I was in that building. It was the media company. I went there. I've been at Bates for a little bit. If you look at my resume or anyone's on my LinkedIn, I jumped around a lot my first few years in industry. I went there to Bates to work on what did I work on at Bates? Or the media company, sorry. The media company I worked on, BMW. That's where I went.
Mm.
It was BMW.
Was that your first
Uh,
foray into automotive?
it was my first auto, and it was BMW, and BMW was one of these advertisers. We did a ton of print, but we're like, "If we can't get a cover position, we're not booking." So it felt like it gave me a lot of power when I was negotiating. It's like, and because people would know, we would walk away if we didn't get a cover position for BMW.
And for anyone
And
watching or listening who might not be familiar with a cover position, just explain to us where that is in the magazine.
yeah, so it's inside front cover, back cover, or inside back cover at last priority. Inside front cover, outside back cover would be the key priority positions that we would book. Yeah.
I imagine at that point, people knew your plan and were probably holding it for you.
Yeah. That's where I think that's where you start to realize for me, or I realized, is how important those relationships were. Like people would call me, it's like, hey, Jen, this is selling out. Do you have approval to book this yet? Because, and they don't, nobody has to do that as a salesperson. If somebody's offering you money, take the money. But I
Mhm.
think sometimes those relationships, when you're like, oh, Jen's going to want this, was really helpful to have those relationships. It's also a place where I built a ton of personal friendships with people I'm still friends with today. But BMW was a big one. Also worked on Stork candies. We had Chupa Chups at a time when they were doing some interesting things. They're still doing interesting things, but for me, it was interesting. Werther's was there, worked on some book launches. Like, it had a really ended up with a pretty robust portfolio of clients there. So I love, it's what I've loved about all my jobs is I've tended not to work on like just one big single account. I've tended to have a portfolio of smaller accounts. Just for me, that's more of that curiosity and getting to play in a lot of different spaces.
Do you like that? Sorry, just going back to that a little bit. What do you like about that? Let's expand on it a bit more. You touched on it, but I want to understand because there are some people who work at, I'm not going to call it specific agencies, but there are some agencies that are so siloed on one account that that's what they're doing from top to bottom.
Yeah, I prefer and maybe it's just, a little bit of focus issues, I don't know. I like being able to solve different problems. I have worked on single accounts, but it feels like when you're on one big account, you're solving the same problem over and
Mm,
over again.
that's a good point.
Whereas this way I get to learn different things, understand the data around different consumer groups, understand different media channels to really, one, build my network, but also my understanding. So having a variety for me has always been way more interesting. Um, and if you see, I'm sitting in front of a huge bookcase of books. Like you can tell, I'm constantly just trying to do a lot of things and understand a lot of things. So I think a variety of accounts is that same idea.
And I imagine sometimes you'll learn something from CPG that works in automotive and maybe vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes there's just like these nuggets of information you can get from one category and apply elsewhere. Yeah.
So let's talk about your next role. You make the jump to FCB Media and you're the
Yeah.
group media manager. So tell us what that entailed and what brought you to FCB.
I think I was recruited to FCB. Uh, oh, Coors Light. I wanted to work on alcohol. I had done some alcohol at the media company. Um, I'd worked on a few brands for Corby's while I was at the media company. My my account list is long, which is why I can't always remember where I did what.
But beer we
But
know is completely different from spirits.
it is. So I went to FCB to work on Coors Light was the big one, and again, to be back inside a full service agency, because that was the one thing that the media company, it was just media versus my prior agencies had been full service. So having those
Mm,
connections and conversations with the creative team, with the account team, all of those different teams, I've always appreciated having that richness of conversation. So I worked on Coors Light. I also worked on Export A, on their Extreme Sports series. I worked
hold on, was
on
Export A a tobacco company?
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
okay, so let's stop there because this is at a point where tobacco companies couldn't advertise, but they could get involved in other things. Like I'm
yeah,
thinking Symphony of Fire. That one comes up.
yeah.
And so what were the nuances with that one? Because that's a tricky one.
It is. So JTI for Export A, we did Extreme Sports series. So the X in the word Extreme Sports was the same as like on the packaging or something for
Mhm.
Export A. I can't remember how the brand tied in there subtly. Um, but yeah, so we got to do again a lot of resto bar advertising. We did advertising on the pool tables on the felts. It's one of the first people to book that in Canada. I don't even know if you can do that now.
I wouldn't even know
Uh,
how you book that. Like, do they just bring the tables in? Do they strip the felt off? Do they have something that just goes on the billiards
They
table?
there's some ink injection into the felt, and they refelt the tables.
Okay.
That's how they do that.
Wow.
So there was a lot of out of home we could do. So between Coors Light and Export A, I was doing a ton of out of home advertising at that point, booking a lot. Um, and that was actually where I had my 3rd campaign I had to pull. I've had to pull a
Okay.
lot of campaigns,
Yeah. No, this is
which,
good. Go for it. I want to hear this one.
um I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this one, but Coors Light had a campaign, and the prize was to go see a concert at the top of the World Trade Center. And I bet you can guess when that campaign was supposed to launch.
That was supposed to be a 2001 campaign.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we had to pull
geez.
it before it even launched. Fortunately, it hadn't actually launched. So most people don't know this. Coors Light moved really quickly to make sure it never saw the light of day. But it was an interesting thing to have to do that and just really address that.
I mean,
Uh,
I don't think there's anything wrong talking about it. It's
yeah.
factual. It was a plan, and you
Yeah.
guys had to get a. I mean, we know what happens next, and you guys
Yeah.
just had to shelve it after that.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, unfortunate, but wow.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that happened there, so I did stay there a while. I also worked on some Ontario tourism work, worked on that account while we had the SARS epidemic or the bird flu that was happening. So we had a whole team. The government of Ontario came with a lot of money one night. They're like, "Hey, we need to announce this tomorrow. So you guys need to figure
Okay.
out how we're spending it today." Um, so we had a team, and this is where I love like the full team stayed overnight to write the media plan, to write the marketing plan, but then the premiere announced the next day, which is kind of a cool way to pull teams together. Not that we want to have these epidemics where this has to happen, but it was just a really cool experience of people coming together
Well, it's kind of
to
nice
solve
that we
problems.
approached it that way because now we
Yeah.
just go into perpetual lockdowns. But back then, it's like throw a concert. Was this the one that they had the Rolling Stones headlining? It was up at Downsview. Yeah, yeah. Things were a lot different back in the day, weren't they?
Yeah, we did a whole media plan overnight for that, and that was also a thing that I did there working on Ontario tourism. I got to f It was the first time I was booking media in the US because we were trying to get
Okay.
Americans to come to Canada. So that was my first time I really got to do that.
I'm curious, how successful was that? Did you get a lot of like, I mean, that, okay, so it did work. A lot of Americans crossed the border to come for, was it SARS Fest?
Yeah, SARSStock or something like that, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah,
what,
we started to get tourism back because I think it was so isolated, and I also think social media wasn't what it is today. Um, so, like, the fear was
Mm.
managed differently than I think it would be today for something like that.
Well, now you have to be like 6 feet apart and wearing a mask. And back then it was just like cram in with your friend, grab a beer, share a cup, and enjoy a
Yeah,
concert.
do
Like,
what
yeah,
you need. Stay
people
away
were
from the birds, it's fine.
stay away from the birds, but share all the fluids you want. Okay. So, okay. But is this point in your career really starting to move up? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're managing people just as much as media.
Yeah, definitely when I was at FCB, it became a pretty good sized team. We were a really tight team. Again, still talk to some of those people now. I'm proud to see what some of those people are doing in their careers today. It's incredible to see how people have continued to grow and stay in this industry. Yeah, We went through a lot at that time, like, FCB was where I was obviously during 9/11. We had the blackout, we were all there
Mm.
together when that happened. So, I think there's just some of these moments you just know who you were with when they happened.
Okay, let's talk about the blackout because okay, I imagine because the blackout happened during the day. In case anyone's wondering what we're talking about, what was it? Would we say 2003, 2004 when the
Yeah,
blackout
somewhere in
happened?
there, yeah.
It was in the summer, and I want to say it was August. And anyone listening to this, go Google a blackout that basically took out the eastern seaboard in Canada and the northeastern United States and pretty much Ontario right through to the rest of Canada going east. But where were you when it happened?
I was at FCB and a bunch of us and across the street. So, FCB was at Mount Pleasant and Eglinton. Above, there's a, um,
There's
brewery there.
I know the brew pub. Yeah, I know which one you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Across the street was a restaurant called Vivo's. It's not there anymore, but a bunch of us went there. They had an outdoor patio space. They put a path of candles to the bathroom, and we all sat outside drinking and eating whatever food they still had that they needed to get rid of because they had no refrigeration.
Mm.
And we all basically had IOUs if we didn't have cash. So a bunch of us stayed there until it got really dark out. And I stayed with a friend who was at Davisville, which was not that far. We walked to her place, stopped at Pizza on the way home because they had gas-fired ovens that were still working. So we waited in line
Oh,
to get
nice.
pizza. Yeah, because they were doing credit cards back with like the old swipe machine where they had to like get
Carbon
the
copies. Yep.
impression. Yeah.
Yep.
So we paid for pizza to that. And I hung out with my friend that night at Davisville. So I never really got that far from FCB, but that's what we did with the blackout.
Do you remember the point when you realized or you heard this wasn't going away quickly? Because the first thing that comes to mind when the power goes off is this is inconvenient. Hopefully, it's not too long, but you usually expect it to be up and running within anywhere between 5 minutes to 30 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
do you remember when you realized that this is quite bigger than your local power outage?
Yeah, I think because we were still at the office, that's when we just decided to go drinking, so it never really, like, set in that we had to worry about it.
I
Naive,
was
perhaps.
I was lifeguarding at a pool. It was a summer job for me, and we had to clear everyone out because we had no power. And then 20 minutes later, some woman, a parent had shown up and she had a radio that was working and she was kind of like quasi hysteric. And she said, "The Eastern Seaboard's out. We don't know what's going on. What's wrong?" We're just like, "What is she talking about?" And then it just, with every hour that progressed, you started to learn that, yeah, we're in some serious trouble here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So just touching on that again. So you
Yeah.
move up, you're managing people, you're managing
Yes.
them through a blackout and through
Yeah.
SARS and everything else.
Yeah.
What I find in this industry is that as you start to manage people, you're doing less and less of the stuff that people want to do when they get into this industry. Like you
Mhm.
become more of a coach and less of a player. Was that hard for you to adapt to?
I don't know that it was hard. I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is I had some really terrible managers
Okay.
at some of these jobs, which is partly why I left some of them. And I think as I became a manager, my goal was to not be these awful people and really taking the time to recognize what it was that was awful about some of the managers I had. So my approach has always been trying to be the opposite of the bosses I had. And one of the things that I've always done as a manager, um, and if any of the people I've managed are listening, they'll can tell you if this is true or not. My thing has always been, I'm going to tell you everything I can. And if you burn me and you
Mhm.
make something out of what I've told you, it will stop. But as long as it is safe for me to tell you stuff, I will tell you as much as I possibly can so you understand why decisions are being made, what's happening around you. And I think that has always engendered for me a lot of trust on my teams. Is they're like, oh, Jen's got us. She knows what's going on. She's making these decisions for a reason.
I
So
know
I
what you're
think,
saying.
yeah,
Yeah. It's like being that unfiltered. You're giving them unfiltered
yeah,
context into what's going on. Because sometimes people sound too much like a business textbook in our industry.
yeah,
And you're just like, I
yeah.
don't even know what that means.
And there's also so many people that think that information is power and they want to use it against people as opposed
Mhm.
to with people. And I've seen it
Yes.
so many times and it was like, information's information, it's what you do with it. But if you try to manipulate, use it for your advantage, that's when it gets really icky.
Do you have any okay, so staying on this topic, do you have any managers, don't have to call them out, but if you've got any examples of someone while you were working with them, you thought maybe they were a little too rough around the edges, but then as you started to, distance yourself from that job and that manager and you moved up and moved places, in hindsight, you started to realize with a bit of empathy why they were the way they were, and maybe you had a bit more appreciation for them.
I don't have anyone in particular. I think over time I've understood more the fear that comes once you get more senior, like the and I think today this is true of any level, but I think his in my career, which has been 29 years in advertising, was the more senior you got, it was almost less security that you had. So I
Yeah.
think people used information to sort of protect themselves in a way. Um, so I can understand it more. I don't have to like it, but I can understand a little bit more about some of that fear or some of the managers I had that were on temp contracts. So they wanted to make
Mm.
themselves more valuable to keep those contracts. But in doing so, they made everyone else around them miserable.
And that's the problem with climbing the ladder. It's lonely at the top and there are fewer opportunities. I mean, in sales, very few VP roles, but if you want to be an individual contributor, plenty of
Yeah.
companies hiring at any point if you want to bounce
Yeah.
back into that. It
Yeah.
reminds me a little bit of one manager I had. I'm not going to name him, but he was really good to work with. And then one day we got optics into what he was dealing with from his superiors.
Mhm.
And then and all of us had he didn't share it with us. It just happened to he called us into his office and he happened to have his email open and we saw half of what someone had said to him and we're just like, Jesus, you like there's no way you're afraid of a legal department if you're putting that in an email to someone. And I remember a couple of us came out of that meeting where he was discussing certain things with us and we're like, we need to be even nicer to him just because
Mhm.
we know exactly what kind of shield he has put up with some of the crazy people that he has to answer to. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's talk about your shift to Starcom because this is the start of a really big pivot in your career. So the move to Starcom, you said that were you headhunted for this role as well too?
I think I'd reached out to a recruiter on this
Okay,
one.
so you reached out to a
And the
recruiter.
reason was, I'll just say this because I think it's a funny story, but it also is one of those things I think as managers, it's important to know how things are received when you say them. Because my 5-year anniversary was the longest I'd stayed anywhere. I was at FCB for 5 years. I liked a lot of people there. Um, but the head of the company at the time, he was giving me my 5-year award, and he's like, "Jennifer is a tireless workhorse."
Ooh,
And I was just like, I know he meant that as a positive, like, "I'm gonna get everything done." It's all that, but I was like, "That's not how I wanna be remembered."
no, those aren't leadership quality. That's not a
Yeah.
leadership saying, that's not leadership
Yeah.
positioning.
And he
Yeah.
meant it lighthearted, he meant it as a positive, I know that, but at the same time, I was like, "Oh, okay." So I started to really look at other opportunities, and then I met with Starcom in Toronto to go work on the Walt Disney Studios, and of course, in your career, Disney is one of those accounts you wanna touch.
Yes.
It is one of those iconic brands that you're like, "Oh, I need to have this on my resume." And I went for the first interview with Ann Erskine, who is at the CBC now, still one of my good friends. And her and I just started talking about what we were going to do when I started. Like, we didn't even interview. Like, it was just like, oh, okay, this is when you're going to start. This is what we're going to do. This is the stuff. And I was like, okay.
That's
Um,
important. Hold on. Can we put a
yeah.
let's pause on that for a second because you've been talking about how important it is to have a strong network and how they've helped
Hmm.
you along the way. I don't think a lot of people realize this, that there's a certain point where you're just so close with people that you kind of partially bypass the job interview portion and you start talking about a plan to integrate into the company and what you're going to do on day one.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it was the first time I met her, but we were just so aligned on how to manage teams, what needed to happen, how to work with a brand like Disney and understand the challenges. She was clearly needing a partner to really help her. At the time, there was not a marketing team in Canada. The marketing team was in LA. So they had this barrier of understanding different countries, which is why she just needed somebody like me who could be really patient with the
Mm,
Americans and explain Canada to them and why at the time we didn't have national TV ratings and different things, why NBA wasn't as important as NHL on a media plan. Things that in Canada were like, yeah, of course. but in the US, they didn't quite understand some of that nuance, so I spent a lot of time talking about that.
It's funny, I had, when I was, working in television on the sales side, I was working with, it was someone who I knew on the other side, and it was one theatrical company. It wasn't Disney, but yeah, it was, oh god, what was it? It was just coming out of the, we were still sort of in the Great Recession. I wanna say it was the spring of 2009, and they were willing to pay a premium for baseball, even though the baseball numbers were not very strong, but because I think it was Versus in the US was giving them 2 for 1 on hockey. They were demanding 2 for 1 on hockey in Canada as well. And, like, the agency was very candid with me. They're like, "We know this isn't the way it should be, but understand this is the pressure we're put under, so try to help us if you can," which we couldn't because we're not giving away hockey 2 for 1.
Correct, yeah.
But, yeah, it is funny dropping that bit of knowledge with them. And so, okay, take me through what it was like trying to assimilate them into the Canadian culture. And actually, was this your first time working on a theatrical company?
It was my first time working on theatrical, um, and home entertainment at the time,
And
and
that's
I
right,
ended
home
up
entertainment was a thing, yeah.
yeah, buying DVDs, buying yeah, Blu-ray, that was the whole thing, whole stream. It was my first time working on studio, so I had to learn studio business, I had to understand what the US was doing because a lot of what happened was, here's the US media plan to launch a movie, and then, "Okay, Jen, make this Canadian," and trying to figure that out, and the budgets didn't always match up with what needed to happen. So it was an interesting challenge to both understand what the US was doing and then pivot to go, okay, what do we actually need to do for Canada for this particular movie? And is it going to play in Canada? Because there are some
Mm.
cultural differences in terms of is this movie going to even make sense in this market to the same way?
We should be clear, it wasn't just Disney, you're working on, like, Touchstone Pictures,
Yeah.
like, there's some serious movies in there, so if anyone's thinking
Yeah.
that everything you're doing was, like, Mickey
Animated.
Mouse, yeah,
Yeah.
animated, that's not the
No.
case at all.
Yeah. It was Touchstone at Buena Vista. Yeah.
Really, there were actually films that Disney put out that weren't released in Canada?
They didn't get outside of Toronto, perhaps. There were some
Okay,
limited
limited
releases.
release.
Yeah.
Okay, so they bring you in, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were supposed to spend 2 years helping them understand the Canadian market, like, being their sort of, like, Team Canada coach. But then an opportunity presents itself to parachute into LA and work on the business, I guess, at the mothership.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened is there was a lot of meetings, and I flew to LA to go to these meetings on the Disney lot, which again, very cool opportunity.
Mm.
Um, but I think they finally realized after probably 8 months, they're like, hey, Jen, do you actually just want to move to LA and help bridge this gap closer? And you can learn the studio business and you can teach us about Canada. And at the time, I was like, it was a 2 year contract. I was like, sure, I can do anything for 2 years. And, it ended up being 17 years that I stayed in Los Angeles.
Whew,
I did
you
not
had
end up
fun.
yeah, I didn't end up working on Disney that long out of that as a proportion. But it was a great opportunity. It was a great chance to understand everything. It was probably only a year or 2 that I'd been there that they actually brought in a team here in Toronto to do studio marketing. So my client ended up being back in Toronto while I was in LA. The account went up for pitch and review. We lost the account. And then I started to get moved around to a bunch of different pieces of business in LA because at this point I was in a relationship with an American. So the
Mm.
company was being really helpful and like, hey, Jen kind of wants to stay here. How do we keep the job here for her? And then I eventually wasn't working on anything Canadian and only working on US accounts. That relationship ended and I still stayed in LA. And I was doing that for 17 years.
Okay, so a couple things to pick apart here.
Yeah, do
When
that.
okay, no, this is a good one. I like it when people move around like this because there's a lot of nuances that nobody discusses. So you get the offer to move to LA. So if I was in your shoes, the first thing I'm thinking about is, are they going to pay me enough to live there properly? Because let's just say for argument's sake, you're very comfortable with your life in Toronto. And all of a sudden you're looking at it going, now I'm going to have an American mortgage. Or maybe I have to rent in America and I have to give up my property here and sell that. So I'm starting to think like the long term, what kind of financial impact this is going to have on me. Don't go into dollars and cents, but do they say to you, look, we're going to look out for you. So when you do get here, you're not really too and a lot of soccer teams in Europe tend to do this as well. They want you to be focused on playing, so all of the other sort of things that would happen outside or off the pitch, they kinda look after. So did Starcom jump in and say, "Look, don't worry, we'll help you sort out a place to live. We'll help you understand which neighborhoods you might want to be in that are close to the office. We just need you to come here and be here on day 1 and just be solely focused on the task that we're hiring you for."
Yeah, it was a bit of both because it was a fixed term contract originally that I signed. The contract had things like how many times they were going to pay for me to return to Canada to see my family. They paid
Oh,
for
okay.
tax preparation for those first couple of years. The first month, they'd put me up in corporate housing. So it was like furnished housing so I could get my feet and my bearings around the neighborhoods. And they didn't really have, apparently, they were supposed to have somebody who was supposed to help me more, but it didn't happen. But there were so many people I already knew in the LA office from having worked with them for a year that people really helped. The way I actually found the place I lived in for the first 6 years is I was talking to a sales rep in Toronto and telling them that I was happening. And they're like, oh, I have this friend who lives in LA and is looking to rent out their house. And like introduced me to this Canadian who had a house in LA that ended up, against all odds, being less than 2 miles from the office.
Nice.
So
Again,
I ended
networking.
up networking, ended up living in this woman's house. She is Emmy award winning. I've seen and touched her Emmy. It was very cool. So I lived in her house. I had 2 rooms in her house. She was barely there. And I lived there for like the first 6 years. I lived with that guy for a while, and then I lived on my own for a while. Um, but that was 8 years after being in LA. So they did help, and to the salary, they did adjust the salary to be appropriate for the US and for California. The funniest thing that happened was when I was signing all the paperwork, everyone's like, "Oh, this is gonna be so much better. You're moving to the US, you won't have to pay as many taxes." But it was California, so I paid
Mhm.
just as much taxes as in Canada, and I think I had this expectation my taxes were gonna be way less or my deductions were gonna be way less, and they weren't. So, that was the
No.
biggest surprise, really.
You gotta skip over the border to Nevada if you wanna get an exemption from state,
Mhm.
in they don't have any state income taxes there. Okay,
Yeah,
so we talked about the personal adjustment, but what about the professional adjustment? Here's my question for you. Pretend you're doing the same job in Starcom LA versus Starcom Toronto. Are all the processes the same? Like, putting aside that the vendors you're dealing with are obviously different, but if someone comes to you with, say, $1 million media plan, Disney comes to you with $1 million media plan in LA, and, we'll say it's 100,000 in Toronto, the process of getting that on air or getting those billboards up and so forth, is it the same?
exactly the same.
Exactly the same, so nothing changes there. So in many ways, it was just like riding a bike.
Yeah, and when I first got to LA, I was still running Canada. I didn't
That's
even
true,
have to
yeah.
use the US. But then as I was there, I learned more about the US, did more US things. The scale is obviously different. The dollars are obviously very different, but the process is exactly the same. Because I was in LA for a year and a half, 2 years. They moved me onto the US side of the business for a while. Um, didn't love that.
Well, why not? Why not?
Studio business is just way too self-important at the time. I don't know if it's still the same post lockdown. Um, It just felt so self-important, like getting a phone call because the producer's wife didn't see an ad for a movie on CNN. I was like, "It doesn't
Uh,
make sense to be on CNN, but sure, I'll go buy some spots so the producer's wife can see it." And even the out of home you're buying based on who can see it on their drive home. Like, it was just stuff like that that felt weird. You don't really do that for many other accounts. I think there's sometimes you do, but it was all the time on studio business. I learned so much that I could take and start to use when I was working on some of the other US accounts I worked on over time. Yeah, but it was different. I think the biggest difference is really in the approach, which in the US, it is a lot more direct. I think in Canada, sometimes it's very passive aggressive. It is, I'm gonna talk around the thing I really want, is how
mm,
sometimes it comes off, whereas in the US, they want something, they're gonna tell you they want something.
gotcha.
And also a studio business, they're gonna do that more than anyone else, quite frankly. So I learned a lot there how to manage more directly and how to work with teams differently because of that approach. And when I came back to Canada, I had to unlearn a little bit of that. I was a little too direct when I got back.
I can relate to what you're saying about, like, literally an executive's wife saying, "Why didn't I see my ad here?" and so forth. When I was working at the CBC and I was calling on theatrical companies, there was one theatrical company that would try to argue that if their ad ran in the 3rd period, it technically wasn't running in the game. Like, it was just, like, the weirdest email to get. So, on one hand, we used to have to manage their expectations and say, "No, it's in the game." But then on the other hand, in the background, we'd go down to the traffic department who was placing the ads and be like, "Look, can you just make sure this runs in the 1st period? You're just gonna save me a whole load of grief if you do that." Yeah, it is strange, but so you mentioned that you were really only on, theatrical business for a bit before moving into other roles. So you were media director, you were the SVP, you were an SVP there as well too. Let's go to SVP. So you're basically at the top of your career at this point. You're in Los Angeles. When do you have that, like, what's it like doing that job down there? And when do you kind of have this epiphany where you think, "Okay, maybe it's time to come home?"
Yeah, so that's a couple different questions. The running accounts and being senior there, over time, that office grew and expanded and shrunk, and it became a fairly small, tight office. And I was running most of the accounts in LA at my last few years there. And we had a really good group of people. I still talk to a lot of those people. I was texting some of them last week. And just we were just really tight in getting stuff done, knew who was best at getting different things done. And a lot of my job was trying to get what was happening in Chicago, where the head office was, and then New York, because there was a new leader who had moved to New York, making sure they didn't forget about LA and whatever was being rolled out in these larger offices, we still got in LA, even though we were running a lot of the smaller accounts. So there was a lot of that. There ended up being a lot of leadership changes that happened through lockdown, through a lot of those COVID years, early COVID years. So the things had started to change in a very different direction for that agency. Some good, some bad, some indifferent. But what had really happened is during lockdown, I wasn't coming to Canada to see my family. They hadn't come to see me. And my nephew was 6 years old. And I'd see him and he'd do the like shy, hide behind his mom thing. And I was like, this is not happening because it broke my heart every time. And it's just me and my brother now. Both of our parents have passed. And him becoming a father was just unlocking some stuff. And I was just like, I just want to be here for my family. So in late 2022, I was here in Canada, started to talk to some of my friends in Toronto about thinking to come back. They were very supportive. Talked to Starcom about coming back to Toronto and doing a transfer back. And just sort of started to talk about it, manifest it. Obviously did not tell my team in LA any of this because it would was a really difficult conversation with them when I had made the decision. Yeah, and it was one of my friends here in Toronto who had set me up with an introduction at Cara to get the role that brought me back to Canada.
Was there a bit of withdrawal when you moved back to Canada? Like you said, you'd been in LA for 17 years and you'd accomplished a whole heck of a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm proud of my time in LA and the experiences and the growth that I had there. Coming back to Canada was interesting because I had been at one agency for 17 years, and we've talked about how much I moved in the early part of my career. So one agency that long was a lot. So and to leave that was a lot. Coming to Kara and Dentsu was interesting. I worked with Sarah Thompson, who is still super fan of hers because she's going to challenge you in a way not everybody loves, but I'm like,
Mhm.
challenge me, make me better, make me think about this differently. And so that part was really good, and the challenge that I had, it was very much what you said, it was managing people, it wasn't doing media plans, and it was bringing teams together was really what was happening because the teams there had been working pretty isolated, and
Mhm.
it was trying to go, "Okay, what does Kara actually mean in this city?" And try to get people to understand Kara versus Dentsu was one of my big jobs, which I think I was I was on the way to do. Um, and then there was a leadership change last January that there was just a difference of values in how we wanted to approach work. So my time there came to an end after just over 2 years.
You mentioned moving around a lot earlier in your career, but then also spending 17 years at Starcom. Do you look back and go, "Okay, I know what I like and what I don't like from leadership," or no, I shouldn't say like and don't like, but I know what I need and what I don't need from a leadership team. Because sometimes when people bounce around in this industry, especially early on in their career, you point at them and you think that they're a jumper and you treat them like a liability. But then in retrospect with you, you spent all that time at Starcom, so you knew exactly what you needed from leadership in a team.
Yeah. And again, like the first job as I mentioned, I got fired from, but the other ones, I was moving really because of leadership. Um, and then Starcom I came to just because I just needed a change after all that time at FCB, and they had also gone through some leadership changes. So yeah, I'm really clear about what I want in a leader and who I'm partnering with at that. Because at a senior level, you're really partnering with the leadership team. You're not they're your boss and they set goals, but you really have to be able to partner and have honest conversations and challenge what's happening and be able to listen to each other and go, okay, this is what I need, but this is what I have, and this is what I need, and this is what's possible. So I think when you get that senior, being able to have those really honest conversations with the management group and your boss is incredibly important.
And it's like you said, when it comes to managers, that's why you're leaving. And you see that on LinkedIn a lot. People sometimes will, in like a burst of frustration, will copy and paste the same post that says people don't quit jobs, they quit bad managers. So I can completely relate to that. But let's bring things full circle. So you
Mhm.
mentioned moving on from Kara, and
Mhm.
then this is where we start create with Jennifergel. So where did the idea come from? Was it something that had been stewing with you for or simmering for a number of months or a number of years, or
Years.
a
Yeah.
number of years? Okay, so this is something that had been at either the back or the forefront of your mind, and you were just looking for the right opportunity to say go.
Yeah. So where it actually started, it actually does go back to Starcom in Los Angeles. In 2016, 2017, there were 13, I want to say VPs or SVPs and above in that office. And they had internal leadership coaching at Starcom in the US. I don't think they have it anymore. And they had brought team leadership coaching for us as leaders to that office to go, hey, how do we make Starcom LA stronger and have this leadership team act more cohesively? And through that process, I was just profoundly transformed because we also got one on one coaching. I was doing therapy at the same time. Very LA to have a therapist and a coach at the same time. Highly recommend it. But I was just really profoundly transformed. I was like, wow, this is magic. I want to learn more about coaching. And in 2018, I actually started coach training. So did coach training 2018, 2019, did certification 2019, 2020. So I've been a certified coach since 2020. So for 6 years now. And so I was doing some workshops within Starcom, not working with the LA office because I was personally too close to that team to
Mm.
coach them. So we had some really good ethical boundaries there. So I would work with the Chicago office or some of the people in the New York office with some coaching. But coming back to Kara, I had to really put that aside because the role I had, it would have felt really unethical to be trying to coach people who I work with, trying to
Mm.
coach vendors, trying to coach clients, and trying to build a business on the side when I had a role that was so senior at an agency. So it kind of got tabled for a couple of years and brought out when this opportunity is like when the role ended at Kara, I was like, wait, what did I really love about that? What did I want to do more of? And it's like, I really love working with people. I love the people that I got promoted or supporting people through role changes. And I was like, wait, I just want to spend the time building this coaching practice because I really love the working with people side of it.
What market gap or opportunity did you see that you felt the experience you had gave you could capitalize on?
Well, some of the conversations I've been having is one, I've worked with a lot of bad leaders, so I know what people shouldn't be doing. So there's that. But also, I've talked to a lot of different organizations and they've brought in coaches from outside of the industry who don't always understand the, what I would say, unusual politics that happens in advertising. Even on the sales side, you have to sell to a
Yes.
planner, you have to sell to a buyer, you have to sell to a client. And understanding it's not just one person saying yes or no, there's a sequence of people. And I think sometimes outside coaches don't understand those dynamics. So that's where I can come in and have a lot more empathy and understanding for what is happening and how to help leaders navigate in a way that's authentic to the experience of working in advertising.
So, how has the company changed over time? Like, what did it look like day one versus today?
Hmm. When I first started and got certified in 2020, I did have clients to get credentialed. You had to have a number of clients. I was working with a lot of just individuals who I randomly knew or got referred to me going through life changes, which still love doing coaching through that. But now it is really way more focused on leaders and team dynamics. And I've been really working on this framework I'm calling the three dynamics of trust, which is understanding the self trust, which is how are you regulating yourself, relational trust, how is it in an individual team, and collective trust, which is the container of the company psychologically safe for people to actually do their best? Because you'll go into companies and you can see these teams are really tight. You've got these groups of like 3 to 6 to 10 people who are super tight, but they actually don't feel like part of the entire company. So a lot of that is what's happening there as a culture of that company that we can work with. And as a leader, how are you showing up? Do you trust yourself and know yourself well enough to authentically lead or lead from a really genuine, heart centered place and not be afraid to bring your whole human to work?
And if anyone listening or watching this wants to get more information on Jennifer Gel, what's the best way they could do that?
My LinkedIn is the easiest or jennifergel.com, my
Okay, we
website.
all right, so if you're listening, go to the LinkedIn profile, go to the website, but if you're watching this, we've put it at the bottom of the screen as well, both of those URLs. And before we jump to rapid fire questions, I wanted to pose you a coaching question. I'm kind of reframing it as a coaching question. It's something that I ask all of my guests who have achieved a series of promotions within a single company. And that's, let's say you're coaching someone and they say, Jen, I really want to move up within my company. I kind of want to have that same career that you had at Starcom. I like the company I'm at. I enjoy the work, but I want more. What would you say to them? What would you encourage them to do to make themselves more attractive for an internal promotion?
Hmm. I would work with a client to really help them understand and reframe their strengths as values for the client, for the company. Um, there's no advice giving and coaching generally because that's consulting. It's really helping people pull out what they want and getting to the core of why you want this promotion. What is it that is fulfilling for you that you can bring and start to have those dialogues with your managers? What are the projects you can take on that fulfill your values, your wants, your needs in order to add value to the company, to have them see it, recognize it? And as well in Canada, there's also what is the advocacy that you need to do for yourself? I think in the US, sometimes the advocacy is a lot easier to do. You just go to your boss and say, I want a promotion. They don't always get it, but you're stating what you want. Whereas I think in Canada, sometimes we wait for somebody else to recognize us. So that is a huge difference I've seen. So in Canada, like the teams here is I also would encourage you to advocate for yourself and say, this is my goal. This is what I want. How do I get there?
Jen, this has been a fantastic chat. You ready for rapid fire questions?
I'm not sure, but let's do it.
All right. The body of work or the campaign you're most proud of?
Oh, body of work campaign I'm most proud of. I think this is going to sound really strange, but there is some work we did for KB Home, which is a regional home builder in the US. And they were one of the first home builders that ever had an ad agency. And we built a system for them so that every single division, and there was at the time 13, 14 divisions, could change their creative every 2 weeks, change their messaging, do everything. So it was really the system. So I'm really proud of the work we did to systematize that and the team culture that was created to deliver on that.
Your favorite movie?
Dead Poet Society.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
Why not?
Your favorite book?
Anne of Green Gables.
Your favorite song?
That's so hard. Um, Somewhere out there, Linda Ronstadt and James Ingram.
The best advice you have ever received?
Just say yes.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
Do it afraid.
And my signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
Well, I would say coaching, but I'm kind of doing that too.
So what would you do
Yeah,
if you weren't in coaching?
but I wasn't in coaching.
Yep.
Travel journalist.
And we're going to end things right here. Jen, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you for having me, Victor, and thank you for making me think.